All right, bet. All right, so who wants to share what was discussed in your breakout rooms? We had 3 points of inquiry. Who wants to discuss some of those points?
Uh,
Oh, sorry.
I oh, I'm cool. Whatever. You can go.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Sorry. In my group, we just kind of talked about how we think it's a really good outline, and kind of the same as Paha. What is it called again?
Pahato Hotep?
Yes. Yes. And how it's just like a moral code. It talks about rightness. And it even gave examples of like all the different kinds of right, like righteousness, rightness, uprightness, and things like that. And a person in my group actually had a really good word for it. It's just kind of like an outline. It gave some specifics, but it's an outline of like moral code and such.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else want to share, Khalil?
One thing that my group briefly touched on was in the beginning of the reading. It states how there is no like real full definition of like the Ma'at, and so like it lacked. It said it was like lacking analytical utility. I thought that was really interesting because the previous reading, Ptahhotep, was very direct in what it was trying to say and get across. So I thought that contrast was interesting.
Okay, we'll pick up on that contrast in that which you just mentioned a little bit in my notes, Khalil, because I think you bring up a good point. Let's get two more before we move on. What else was discussed in you guys' breakout rooms? What questions did you have about the reading or about my as a concept?
I had a question.
Yeah.
I read about in the book about the Oracle of Guidance.
Okay.
I really didn't understand it. Like I was confused on what it was specifically talking about.
Could you point to me a page number or
I actually didn't. Let me try to see. I forgot to write it down. Let me go back to the book.
okay? If you could locate that for me, put it in the chat and then I'll address it. Um,
Okay.
while you look for that, let's get one more and then I'll jump into my notes.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm. Any other questions, comments, or thoughts from the reading or what was discussed in your breakout room?
Okay, I have something to say.
Sure.
In the reading, one thing that really stood out to me was how it said the notation of math is complex and rich. So I found that like since there were so many different people had thoughts on what the definition was or how they, I guess like what their definition were.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing that kind of stood out to me.
Yeah, and that's a good segue, Samina, into a lot of my notes, right? So to get into it, and then again, Alyssa, if you locate the page, just throw that in the chat for me, and then we'll address that from the chat. But the text is called Ma'at, the ancient was the ancient ideal, the moral ideal in ancient Egypt, which we know as Kemet. If you could see, he's actually holding an image of Ma'at there, the goddess. This is written by Maulana Karenga. He is the department chair of Africana Studies at Cal State Long Beach. Also, the creator of the holiday Kwanzaa. Also, a central figurehead in the US organization of the 1960s that rivaled the Black Panther Party for self-defense. We'll get into them a little bit later in the semester. But to jump into it, right? So what we're dealing with is Ma'at, the conceptual idea. We also have a page that, yes, the author created Kwanzaa. We also have a section of the readings that lays out the 42 confessions of Ma'at, and then we're also going into the ontological understanding of what Ma'at is. But we'll spend most of my time dealing with the conceptual idea because I think that gives you the best understanding in what this concept Ma'at is. So looking at page 5, and I'll read, I'm going to actually read this passage in its entirety and we'll kind of break it down because it will be helpful from a standpoint of how to write academic work and then how to understand the reading behind academic work because there's a lot of stuff in there that could be confusing. So we're looking at the first paragraph under 1.2, Ma'at, this conceptual idea, towards the middle of the program, starting with the sentence that says actually. Okay. Actually, I'm gonna go up a little. Yeah, I will start there. It's cool. Ma'at, however, is highly polyseismic and apt to strike one unfamiliar with the conceptual elasticity of such ancient and central terms as lacking categorical preciseness and thus analytical utility. So that's a whole lot of shit he just had right there, right? But we got to kind of break that down because what he's presenting you is called a counter argument, all right? So what is this idea or what is this concept of elasticity? What is that? What is elasticity? It says
So, like,
that, go ahead.
oh, I don't know, but I was thinking maybe like to stretch or something, like to,
Absolutely.
yeah, expand on it.
Yep. It can be shaped, it could be molded, it could be manipulated, right? The interpretation, looking at the chat, the interpretation becomes elastic, right? So you could, it has various interpretations, various usage, and various conceptualizations, right? So it's fluid, okay? So this is what they're saying, right? And they're saying because of this elasticity and its lacking categorical preciseness, and thus analytical utility. So what they're arguing in that sentence is because of the elasticity of this concept of ma'at, you cannot use it as an analytical tool, okay? Now, to follow that comes our counter argument. And this is what Karenga argues instead. Actually, this conceptual elasticity, which at first glance might seem problematic, right? So actually, this elasticity that you might think is a problem, on deeper inquiry, proves promising due to what Marins. So we know that Marins is the last name of an author, right? And we know that because of the parentheses, we have 1984. That's the year that the book that Marins wrote was published. And we know with 16, it was what he's speaking on was found on page 16, right? So this is the quote from Marins. Rich treasury of meaning, right? So we know that this is actually promising due to Ma'at's rich treasury of meaning, okay? For here, one encounters in Ma'at with Kua. We know this is another author. This text was published in 1978, page number 138. He defines as plurisagnation, which allows for and encourages a wide range of thoughts and interpretations. Moreover, within the framework of monistic ontology, which as Feinstad, this is another author, 1985, 1986, 1989, notes, is central to the Kemetic worldview, the conceptual elasticity of Ma'at as a category of interrelated ethical, social, religious, political, and or natural order significance proves invaluable, right? So what they're really arguing is this elasticity of Ma'at is really not a problem. It's actually very helpful and generative when understanding how Ma'at works, right? Because Ma'at can present itself as an ethical phenomenon, a social phenomenon, a religious phenomenon, a political, or a natural phenomenon, right? And he says, because of that elasticity, this allows Ma'at to be invaluable. You cannot place a value on this concept or this notion of Ma'at. Okay, so going to page 6, first full paragraph on page 6. It says the etymology, right? So when we hear the word etymology, we just know that the origin or the this is how the real definition or the root definition of the word, right, suggests an evolution from a physical concept of straightness, evenness, levelness, correctness, right? So think about a ruler, right? Think about a leveler, right? These are physical things that represent notions of straightness, right? A ruler allows you to make a straight line, right? A leveler allows you to make sure when you hang up a picture that it's straight, right? So this physical concept of straightness, evenness, levelness, correctness, it was connotated as the wedged-shaped glyph or hieroglyph, right? um, suggests to a general concept of rightness. So it moved from this physical characteristic that we can think of as symbolizing a ruler, a leveler, right? And it shifts to a more general concept of rightness, including the ontological and ethical sense of truth, justice, righteousness, order. In a word, the rightness of things, right? So there's a shift that took place in Ma'at from a physical symbolism of something straight to a more of an ethical type of connotation, okay? And then he breaks down on page 7 the ecology of Ma'at into 4 separate characteristics, right? The universal, the political, the social, and then the personal. And I'll read how each of those is understood. The universal domain, in which Ma'at is the totality of ordered existence and represents things in harmony and in place. So from a universal idea, Ma'at symbolizes the totality, everything in the universe being in order and in place, right? From the political domain, in which Ma'at is justice and in opposition to injustice. So it's not only about being just, right? It's not only about doing what you're supposed to do and doing what's right. It's about being in opposition to injustice, right? Fighting and getting rid of things that are unjust, okay? Not just accepting them as norm. Our politics in this society accepts a lot of injustice as normal, right? So this is not in line with the Ma'atan idea of politics, because the Ma'atan idea of politics is you are against anything that proves to be unjust. From the social domain, in which the focus is on right relations, again, this notion of relation resurfaces. Think about last week's reading of right relations and duty in the context of community, right? So again, from a social domain, Ma'at is going back to what we read last week in Ptah Hotep, the good speech, right? Eliminating strife, right? Relations. And finally, the 4th domain, personal domain, in which following the rules and principles of Ma'at is to realize concretely the universal order in oneself, to live in harmony with the ordered whole. So just as from a universal context, right, Ma'at symbolizes everything in the universe being in perfect order, in perfect place, in perfect shape, right? In the personal context, Ma'at means that everything in your personal life is in order, is in the right place, is in the right shape, right? So these are how these 4 separate domains of Ma'at become interrelated. And this is why this elasticity becomes very helpful in understanding Ma'at, because you can see how it can be positioned in various parts of life, right? Justice. And then on page 8, he goes into this a little bit deeper. And he really talks about this idea of having a conscience, right, or of doing what's right, is a socially owned concept or idea, right? So Amiri just can't say, well, because I think I'm doing the right thing, I'm living a life that's based on Ma'at, right? All of you within this class community have to agree that, well, Amiri's actions align with Ma'at. Amiri's speech aligns with Ma'at. So it's a community understood notion. It's not just an individually understood notion. And even for the individual to understand himself as being in line with Ma'at, it has to be measured against how the community perceives him, right? This is aligned with the, as we go into next week, we start to talk about West African pre-colonial society, the notion of manhood was viewed the same way, right? So just because I was born with genitals, just because I could impregnate women, right, that does not make me a man, right? From a pre-colonial West African standpoint, there was 4 criteria to becoming a man. One of them being rites of passage at boyhood. The second one being demonstration of physical prowess at adolescence. So when you become a teenager, you have to demonstrate your ability to show your masculinity in whether it's sport, whether it's exercise, whether it's through war, right? That's the second criteria. The third criteria is husbandhood, being able to marry a woman, being able to take care of the household, and being able to be supportive, right? And then the fourth is fatherhood, being able to support a family and raise children. Those are the four criteria that you would have to meet for the society to consider you a man, right? So it's not an individual concept; it's a society and a collective owned concept, and MAAT operates in the same way. I'll put a pause in it there. We'll open it up to our fishbowl. Again, for the fishbowl, you could either talk about what was discussed in your breakout rooms. You could literally read from your journal. You can mention what I mentioned in the notes. All of that is on the table. We'll take 4 to 5. Is there anybody who wants to volunteer?
I would like to volunteer.
So we got you, Joshua. Thank you. Anyone else? All right, so I'll call that random. Sean, Sean Montez, are you ready to fishbowl today?
Yeah, I'm good. I'll do my best fishbowl right now.
Okay, I got you, Jaime. I got you as well. We'll get one more. Does anybody else want to volunteer? All right. Bianca, are you prepared to fishbowl today?
I'm not really too confident, but if anything happens, then I'll volunteer. But yeah.
So are you passing or are you gonna?
Yeah.
Okay.
Passing.
Okay. You got one time to pass. Heather, are you prepared to fishbowl today?
Yes.
All right, cool. So for our fishbowl today, we have Joshua, Sean, Jaime, and Heather. I'll put myself on pause, and you guys are good to go.
Something that I think was interesting from the reading of the that we did yesterday for the mod is this quote, kind of from the passage that you were reading. It says, the MAAT was the foundational ideal of ancient Egyptian religion and ethics. And I think, because of this, we can assume that, these ancient Egyptians followed the ideals of MAAT pretty closely, because it was kind of like the foundation for their like societal beliefs and things like that. And you can see that that there is like a strong sense of morality, like we spoke about justice and what is like unjust. And I think that we can see this in the first reading that we did for this class, the Hilliard teachings of Ptah, because we can see that the ancient Egyptian advisor was giving his son like written advice to follow, and you could see that advice is also, you could argue that it's influenced by the MAAT, the way that he kind of gives like more like moral kind of advice to his son, like like what to do and what not to do to be a good leader. And I think that you can see that these influences did exist.
That's a really good point. I'd like to go ahead and add to that. You got all my basic ideas, but just to add on to what you were saying about religion, in page number 4 of part 1, they talk about not being a part of creation itself, both as a goddess or divine spirit, or as a conceptual personification of order, righteousness, truth, and justice. It sounds to me like it has. It sounds to me like it's in relation to the Holy Trinity. It sounds like Christianity may have taken notes from this, and what you said about how it relates to Ptah. I think you're right. It seems like they both have notes of like morality and ethics, and give like little things of how to live by. I think they both relate in that way.
Good point, Sean.
I also thought those readings related in a lot of ways. One thing that really stood out to me, they talked about the rightness of action, and it seemed like essentially your being is very emphasized, especially they had 3 realms that they needed to satisfy in a moral and spiritual sense for the principle of MAAT. which is the divine, the natural, and the social realms. So they emphasize these like moral and ethical codes and the practice of rightness of behavior towards like the divine nature, as part of like the 7 cardinal virtues of truth, which I thought really stood out. Justice, property, harmony, balance, reciprocity, and order. So I think in any of those 3 realms, all of those things need to be in order. I mean, it's never going to be straightforward in different situations. I think with religion, and especially with, I mean, I think in ancient Egypt, it was a lot easier. There was no social media, there was no different things to cloud people's judgment and get in the way of these divine practices and divine realms. So I think it might have been easier to draw from these virtues of truth and satisfy those 3 realms back then. Today, it's very difficult, even when we do practice religion, Christianity, and things like that. It can get very messy. A lot of people can create, I guess, I see it myself, but like toxic church groups that overemphasize certain things and overstep their boundaries. But I think, just like how we like to say all the time, in moderation, things are good. But practicing what you need to practice in the way you need to practice it, just being upright and doing right unto what is done right unto you, is a big thing.
Yeah, that's a great point, Heather. Thank you. So Jaime, you're up next, man.
So so it was interesting, like what I read. I got an interesting idea and stuff. It says in the text where it says a unity creating idea which unites God, society, and nature and universe. I feel like us, like now, I feel like we lacking all that. I feel like we just fight with each other and all that. And I've seen that when we all come together, every race comes in together. We're very like when we unite, we're like we could say that we're like unstoppable. Like anything, like nothing gets through us. Like a wall could get through us, like a wall could be in front of us, and we'll break through it when we're all together. And another point is when he says when it unites God, I feel like when we're like, let's just say for example, when we're in church and stuff, like we're all united by God, and we're there sitting down listening to the Father talking and all that, and we're listening to what we're saying, and then when he gives us the thing where we have to shake our family's hand or shake other people's hand and stuff, like it shows that we're all together. It shows that we're all together, and what's it called? When that thing finishes, like we're together outside of it still a little bit, and yeah, that's it.
You know, for me, what I really hear in what you're saying, Jaime, is just the power of unity and what society could be when there's a society that's really organized around these notions of relation. And that's also, to me, speaks to Heather's point, right? It's just like, it seems hard in our world because our society is so designed to focus on everything except one another, and how the real being, the individual's ka feels, right? That spiritual essence. We're not trained, or we're not conditioned, or we're not socialized to pay attention to that. So I agree, right? You would have to assume that it would be easier to live a life that's ma'atic in those times, because everything, right, in that society is going to be ordered by ma'at. So if we're going to do a TV show, we're going to make sure that this TV show is structured by the principles of truth, justice, harmony, balance, order, reciprocity, propriety, right? If we're going to make a song, we're going to make sure that that song is fortified by the principles of truth, justice, harmony, balance, order, reciprocity, propriety, right? So everything that's structured within this ancient Kemetic society was organized and filtered through this concept of ma'at. So you're absolutely right, Heather. It's going to be easy to do so, right? To practice a life that's ma'atic. Just as it's easy in our world to be materialistic, to be capitalistic, to be individualistic, right? Because everything in our music, in our movies, in our entertainment, in our information, it reinforces these notions of individualism, of capitalism, of materialism, right? So yeah, I would have to agree. So thank you guys who fishbowled. At this point, we'll go ahead and open it up to a broader class conversation. Anyone could jump in at this point. What were your thoughts on the reading? Anything did not sit well with you? Anything you want to have clarified a little bit more? Any general thoughts? We also have the 42 confessions that we could talk about also.
I think what was interesting to me was we made the little comparisons last week. We're comparing the teachings of Ptahhotep to the Bible. And then as we read this one, I realized that it's more like the Bible than I initially thought. For instance, MAAT is the way of living, or the higher being, or the general good. And the teachings of Ptahhotep were kind of how to live in that way, in that mannerism. So I found that interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, we really can't even separate the teaching of Ptahhotep from Ma'at because he's operating in a society that's Ma'atic. Of course, those teachings are going to embody these principles and these concepts, right? Because he's just one of many who live this way of thinking, this way of thinking, this way of living. So I'm looking at the 42 confessions. We have, and it's kind of dope because they give you the Maître Nature translations, and they also give you the English translations. And if you notice, there's not a lot of vowels in the Maître Nature. But what I have noticed, right, I have not done wrong to people. I have not impoverished my family or friends. I have not done wrong instead of right. I have not known that which does not exist. I have not done evil. I have not set at the beginning of each day's task greater than I have set previously. My name has not reached the offices of those who oversee servants. So, historically, right, also through the works of individuals like Asher Kwesi, we know that these 42 declarations precede the 10 Commandments. In fact, we know that Moses himself, who gave us the 10 Commandments, spent a great amount of time in Egypt in the Kemetic mystery schools. He was trained within the system. But to me, there's a fundamental difference between these declarations and how they're phrased and the 10 Commandments and how they're phrased. What is that fundamental difference? All of these confessions start the same way. I have not. What's that? What's the difference? What are some of the
Is
10
it I
Commandments?
and thou shalt not?
I'm sorry, say it again, Nick.
Is it I and thou shalt not?
So, but speak like let's unpack a little bit more, right? He's saying thou shall not. So, what does that imply? What does thou shall not imply?
I think that's you shall not, right?
Mm-hmm. But the shall not, that's what we want to focus on. Why? How is
Like
that
you have
different?
to, you can't.
Exactly. And why is that different from I have not? What's the difference? What's the distinction? So if I tell you, thou shalt, you better not come to my class not having your shit together, right? Both versus you saying, I will not come to your class not having my shit together. What's the difference?
I feel like in the I version, you're leading by example. You're saying, you know, what you're expecting of someone else, you're expecting from yourself. Whereas the other one is just like all about someone telling you what to do. So it's kind of, I don't know, a little different.
Yeah, and then also the tense, right? I have not is past tense. I haven't done this, right? I lived my life and I did not lie. I have not wronged people. This is how I live my life. This is what I've done. Thou shalt not is future tense. This is what you better not do, right? So I don't know in this class if I talked about how Ma'at, the concept of Ma'at, plays out in the afterlife. So for those familiar with the Catholic religion, this idea or this notion of purgatory, right? You're like waiting to see if you go to heaven or hell. So in the ancient Kemetic tense, there's not really a heaven or hell, but do you successfully get to travel through the afterlife, or do you unsuccessfully get to travel to the afterlife? But what happens is when you make your transition, you have to go before the goddess Ma'at, and you have to state these 42 confessions, right? And your heart is in one end of the scale, and the feather is on the other end of the scale. So as you set these 42 confessions, I have not done wrong to people. I have not impoverished my family or friends. If you're able to utter these things truthfully, then your heart will be lighter than the feather, then you're able to successfully travel to the afterlife, right? If you say, I have not done wrong to people, I have not impoverished my family, I have not done wrong instead of right, and you're lying, then effectively your heart will not be as light than that feather, and you're not able to successfully navigate through the afterlife, okay? This is also why the tense becomes the difference between I have not, because in front of Ma'at, as you utter these confessions, you've already lived your life, right? You're dead. You're at the end of your life at this point, okay? So you're telling Ma'at what I've done while I was living that allows me to go into the afterlife, right? Juxtaposed to a commandment, which is commanding you on how to live, right? It's going to delineate what you need to do before you can make it into heaven. Remember the acronym of the Bible, basic instructions before leaving earth, right? So those commandments, those are those instructions which you better not do if you want to make it to heaven, right? Thou shalt not. Thou shalt not, right? Juxtaposed, well, I have not. I live my life this way. Because remember, think back last week, he put this neter nefer into the universe, this good speech, so that strife can be eliminated from the society, so that goodness and harmony could be the order of that society, right? So it's about how you live in the moment at that time. That's why this has been constructed in the way that I'm going to tell you what I've done while I'm living, while I lived, right? And you can judge me based off of that, opposed to me being commanded on what's right and what's wrong. Again, I think I asked you guys this question last week. What becomes more useful for systems of enslavement, right? If I want to oppress the people, if I want to colonize the people, thou shalt not, or I have not, what becomes more useful? You can see how one institution can easily be manipulated to institute control, institute pillaging of resources, institute spiritual enslavement, right? Other thoughts on the reading? Other questions about the reading?
Yeah, I had a question.
Sure.
So after the reading, and you were talking about my the balance. So it seems like to me, like the thing I took away is he the one who kind of keeps everything in balance, and like through him, like only through him, like you can achieve the afterlife. Is that what they're saying?
That's a good question, Zachary. One, just to be clear, right? Ma'at is a woman. It's a goddess, so it does occupy femininity. Yeah, in a sense, I want to say that is the main deity that you would go through to ensure your successful navigation through the afterlife, right? Now, there's other people that come in play. There's other deities that come into play, like, for example, the scarab, right? Or what we may call the beetle. Anytime you see a scarab with wings, the significance of that deity is going to be the vessel that will carry the spirit through the afterlife, right? So there's other deities that come into play, but it's Ma'at, those confessions, and living your life a life that is ma'atic, that would allow you to successfully navigate the afterlife. Does that answer your question, Zach?
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Thank you.
Cool. Any good question? Any other questions or thoughts?
Can you go can you explain more about Mu'at? I don't know how to pronounce his name.
Ma'at.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So if we think about characteristics, and when I teach rites of passage, this is how I tell the youth, right? There's the principles, and then there's the characteristics. Um, One of those characteristics, obviously, is that she's a woman, right? It's a goddess. Um, the other characteristic is the feather, and we know that that feather comes into place because when she places your heart on the feather, I'm sorry, when you place your heart on the scale, is weighed against that feather. Um, and then again, the principles of Ma'at, the truth, the justice, the balance, the order, the harmony, the reciprocity, the propriety, right? These are principles that can structure and govern your life. Um, so in our justice system, right, we have, what is the image of in our justice system? Does anybody know? The image of justice. If you go into a courthouse, there's like a image or a statue of justice. Is anybody familiar with that?
It's the blind girl holding the two scales in her hand.
So they say justice is blind, right? So that's why you have a woman with a blindfold covering her eyes, and she's holding the two scales, okay? Now, you cannot tell me that that's not a direct bite of Ma'at, right? We know that Ma'at's going to weigh your scales against the heart and the feather, right? We know that a core component of Ma'at is justice, right? Or adverse approach to anything that becomes unjust, right? Give me 1 minute. I'm gonna try to pull something up on your guys' screen. See if I can find you an image of that afterlife. Mm-hmm. Okay, here's a good one. Okay. Okay. So, can you guys see that? So here you see at the top the deities, and these are who are judging to see if you can make it to the afterlife or not. This is also a symbol of Ma'at bodied here. This is her in her winged version because she will assist with the transition into the afterlife. You see the anbis here. There's the heart. Sorry, there's a feather. There's the individual's heart. Tahuti is recording all of what's taking place, and then these jackals are here for the individual who does not successfully navigate their way through the afterlife. Then the jackals will consume their ka, and they won't be able to make it into the afterlife, right? So again, we talk about the elasticity of Ma'at. It has various different interpretations, various different meanings, but it all comes back to this idea, this notion of rightness, right? Making sure that the universe is in order and is right. Making sure that your social interactions are in order and they're right. Making sure that your political interactions are in order and they're right. And then making sure that your personal interactions are in order and they're right. So yes, it manifests in several different spheres, but the essence of it is all the same: rightness, justice, harmony, balance, order, reciprocity, propriety. Any other questions? What are some of the questions that you guys posed in your journal?
Uh, one of the things I was thinking about was why is Ma'at contextualized as like a female goddess that like, but in like Christianity, it's always represented as a guy, like like generally, I feel like. So that was one thing I was just like that just thinking about, I guess.
Yeah, that's a really good ass question, Khalil. Like, and let's do this. I'm gonna pose it to the class, right? So what you're asking, we have this goddess Ma'at, which is clearly like a central figure in the Kemetic society, right? But then when we deal with Christianity, and not only Christianity, you go to Islam, you go to Buddhism, a lot of the major religions, they don't embody females or women in the same light. Why do you guys think that is?
I have like no clue at all.
Yeah,
Like, straight up.
Yeah,
I
I
got
know.
nothing.
That's why we asking the class, the rest of your peers, to see what answers they may come up with. Why is that? What would cause these Western religions, and we'll throw Islam in the Western religions for the sake of conversation. Why would these religions not choose to place an emphasis on women as the Kemetics have? So, for the women in the class, any of you consider yourself Christians? Jessica?
I used to when
Okay.
I was in high school, but now I feel very different about it. But I also just think that, you know, especially in America, I know, they call it the man's world and shit, and we're trying to change that. But I think that has a lot to do with why our God is seen as a man. Although nowadays I hear a lot of mainly females mentioning how no, God is a woman. Like they're trying to argue that concept, or at least I don't know. It would make a lot more sense if she were a woman. Like I think we'd all benefit from it a lot more.
I
So
mean, for all the men in the class, how many of y'all had babies? So what sense does it make to constantly situate God as being a man when men can't even produce life from their own being, right? Like we can't, we carry life, but we would need a woman to help produce the life. So in my estimation, it would only make more sense. It only appears more natural that we understood this concept of God, of the creator, of a force, of an energy as woman, right? It only makes sense. So I agree with you. So one
that
answer,
kind of sorry, I was gonna say that kind of reminds me of the Tupac "Keep Your Head Up," how he kind of mentions that, like how we got our name from our woman, it came from our woman, yet we feel like we can take from them, like
yep,
so that's a huge thing.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. So to answer one way to answer your question, Khalil, to put it simply, patriarchy, right? And this idea of misogyny, right? Just implicit and explicit hatred towards women, right? I think those are some of the underpinnings that doesn't allow these other religions to situate women's role as high as the Kemetic has positioned Ma'at. And then what also your question made me think about was like, what are some of the women characters like in the Bible? What are they doing? I'm not as familiar with Islam as I am in the Bible, but like, what are some of the women characters in the Quran? What are they doing? Some of the women characters in the Buddhist texts, what are they doing? Because that will give you an insight to how those specific religions view the role of women, right? Um, and it's a variety of roles that women occupy. I'm thinking about the Bible in this case, right? You have Mary, um, you have I think there's another Martha, Esther, Moses' wife. So there's women have roles in the Bible, but are they elevated as a goddess? Nah, right? And to me, that speaks to how this society operates, right? When I gave the lecture a couple weeks ago, and I said that when they built statues, they made sure that the status of the women's statue is equal with that of the man, right? Because that embodies the equality that they see between men and women. This being this society being able to position Ma'at as a woman also reflects the way that they view women in their society, right? So I think that's a very good point. And that's also one of those questions that could either build a whole nother set of research, right? Like Khalil could literally do a whole paper just researching why, or the juxtaposition between the Kemetic views of women in spiritual texts versus the Christian views of women in spiritual texts. That could be a whole thesis paper within itself. What else? What else you guys have?
You said something interesting right now, and then, in my opinion, you said God is a woman. I think it's interesting because you brought up Christianity and all that stuff. Like even thinking about Christianity from the very beginning, they based the whole downfall of society or this holy environment off of a woman. So they had it bad from the start. But you said like God was a woman, or like as opposed to a male. But in my opinion, wouldn't God be more genderless? Because it would take two humans to create one individual, but it takes one God to create that same one individual.
I completely agree with you. In fact, oftentimes, especially like in West African, like the Ifa tradition, the Akan tradition, when God is depicted, it's what's the term I'm looking for? Androgynous. It could be, it looks either male or female, just to symbolize what you're mentioning, right, Amir? That you need both, right? So I wholeheartedly agree with you. I just think for me, in my articulation around God being a woman, if I have to say, look at the characteristics and qualities in manhood, right, and what men can naturally do, juxtaposed to what women can naturally do, you have to say that women possess more godlike qualities than men do. Just to carry something for 9 months and to have that thing be dependent on you for its survival, and then to go through the physical angst that women have to go through to produce that child. To me, that's the closest thing to God that we have on in a physical representation. And for sure, men ain't getting down like that. I believe if men was having babies, there'd be one motherfucker on earth, just because we just don't have that capacity in us, right? But good point. Other questions, other comments. Actually, I'm gonna read this one. I want to know what you guys think. I'm looking at page 10 on the opening full paragraph of page 10. Karenga says, the key point of this discussion, then, is that the practice of Ma'at is conceived and carried out within the worldview which links the divine, the natural, and the social. These three domains are interrelated, interactive, and mutually affective. Affective with an A, not with an E. Affective. And a Ma'atan person understands this and acts accordingly, as the history of the idea of Ma'at, which is presented below, demonstrates. So again, this notion that the divine, the natural, and the social are connected, right? So the divine, what we understand, however you so choose to understand God, right? The natural, nature, the natures, right? And then the social, how we interact with one another. All of these three things are interrelated. In our world, we don't understand it like that. They're separate entities. What is the benefit, and we'll end with this, what is the benefit of viewing the connectedness of the divine, of nature, and the social? Why is that beneficial? Why could that be helpful? What does that mean to view?
They all work together well.
So how? Elaborate a little bit more, Caesar. You're right, but give me a little bit more than that.
Like it creates harmony on earth for people and just peace, and it's gonna have everyone work well with each other.
Yeah, I'm gonna. I hope I hope everybody's getting with Caesar's throwing, because they're really on point. So he's talking about this notion of harmony, right? So again, we think about the principles of Ma'at: truth, justice, harmony, right? It's a core principle. So just imagine if we are to understand that God, nature, and the society work together, and these things interrelate in a standpoint that was going to produce harmony, right? So if you know that nature and God is going to inform your politics, there's no way as a society you would allow for things like global warming to take place, right? Because global warming are the consequences of the social of man not honoring the nature, right? That's the consequences of that conflict. Because men seek to dominate nature and not exist within nature, we have global warming, right? So if we are to view these three things as interconnected, as Caesar said, it would allow us to exist within harmony, right? So if we thought about how I'm going to treat you based on God and based on nature, it's going to be hard pressed to see that we have a system of racism, that we have a system of sexism, right? That we have a system of classism, right? Because that's not harmony. That's not an alignment, right? So this is where the author argues that elasticity of Ma'at, right, being able to be applied in various circumstances becomes very useful. And I think he does a great job of demonstrating his claim throughout the paper, throughout the rest of the pages, of how Ma'at can be used in various categories and various spheres throughout life. We'll end there. I do want to show you guys the readings for next week. Give me 1 second. So for next week under classwork, we'll be moving into weeks 4 through 7. I want you to start off with Sommet of Water and the Spirit. These two readings here. The first two PDFs, Sommet of Water and Spirit. I will email those out to you guys no later than Friday, but if you wanted to get started on those early, please do. Again, it's 2 PDFs, but think of them as one reading. And so you only need one journal for that. For next week, we'll be back with Group A and Group B. So if you are in Group A, you'll meet on Mondays. If you're in Group B, you'll meet on Wednesdays. Other than that, enjoy your weekend. Continue to exercise. Continue to get water. Continue to get some vitamin D. Peace.
Bye. Have a good one.